Hello everyone, today I welcome you to the fourth chapter of What If Naruto Found a Legendary Sword? Naruto x INO. If you want a new chapter, subscribe and like. Enjoy.
Chapter 18. Sasori's head slumped forward as Naruto's blade remained lodged in the puppet master's core. Purple liquid dripped from the two incursions made by the blonde Jinchuriki's legendary weapon. Naruto removed Nuabari from the lifeless Sasori, purple liquid coating its tip. Naruto was left staring at a rather depressing scene. Chiyo's mother and father puppets had their blades running through Sasori's gut. The Tsunade elder's chakra threads were still attached to her two puppets for a short time, leaving all three of the lifeless puppets standing temporarily before collapsing to the ground. Sakura looked on as Sasori's puppet body collapsed to the ground, along with Chiyo's mother and father puppets. In front of them stood her former teammate who was responsible for finishing off the Akatsuki member. She had no idea what to say to him, or what he would say to her now that she'd pieced together who he was. She didn't even know how she was feeling about the recent discovery. Sakura had desired to reunite with her lost teammate for the past couple years since his defection. However, she wasn't so sure that was what she wanted now that her desire had become a reality. The shinobi that stood before her couldn't be associated with the Naruto she grew up fighting alongside in Team 7. The masked Nuabari wielder had no emotional characteristics that were similar to the Naruto she knew. She was unable to continue her thoughts as she spun herself around upon hearing Lady Chiyo cough. Sasori had stabbed the Tsunade elder in the back and she was losing a large amount of blood. Sakura ran to her and began to heal the wound on her back. The situation looked grim for Chiyo. The elder had nearly exhausted all of her chakra during the fight and had lost a significant amount of blood already. Sakura began to close the wound immediately, but her reserves had dwindled down, causing the healing process to go slower. Chiyo was applying pressure to the center of her chest where the blade had exited. It was extremely fortunate that the blade had missed a vital organ. Naruto turned around to face his two allies during the fight. Naruto was relieved the fight was over. There were multiple instances where death had been a possibility. He was fairly restricted throughout the conflict due to him having to fight alongside others. This would likely be a reoccurring issue if he were to continue being sent out on missions with teammates. He wasn't strictly going to be sent out on solo missions, so he would definitely need to work on developing more skills that could be utilized outside the mist. Naruto looked down at his left arm that had nearly been severed off. Adrenaline from the fight was dying down, causing the pain in the area to sharply increasing. Shooting pains coursed through him with any attempt to move it. The fox had begun to heal the arm, strengthening and attaching the triceps muscles to the humerus. However, he was still losing blood and the bone was still broken in half. The fox had managed to significantly slow the loss of blood, but the wound would need to be closed and receive some serious medical attention. Like Naruto's previous stomach wound suffered while combating the Kumo-nin, this injury was serious and would require time to heal. He knew he would live though, it likely wouldn't get to a life-threatening point. The same couldn't be said about the Tsunade elder's injury. Sakura was doing well to close the wound on Chiyo's back despite the small amount of chakra she had left. The wound on the front of the elder's chest was smaller, as only the tip of Sasori's blade had exited her chest. Naruto figured that it would be significantly easier to close than the back wound. The real issue facing Chiyo was Sasori's poison. A large amount of it had entered into the Tsunade Kunoichi's blood system and Naruto figured that made her chances of survival slim to none, especially since they didn't have any more of the antidote left. Lady Chiyo, we need to get you back to Tsunade as soon as possible. We can treat you back there, said Sakura in a comforting tone, trying not to hint at the severity of the elder's situation. Chiyo was a seasoned kunoichi who had seen her fair share of grisly injury. She was well aware of how grave her situation was. The likelihood of her survival, even if they did manage to make it back to Tsunade for treatment, was very slim. Sakura, we both know I won't be able to make it back to the village, muttered an ailing Chiyo. We have to try. I won't let you die here, shouted Sakura, refusing to accept defeat. Chiyo chuckled lightly at Sakura's reaction. The girl truly was remarkable. She acted as if they'd been comrades or friends for years, when in reality they had known each other for only a handful of days. Sakura had managed to close the back wound and had moved on to Chiyo's chest. This injury was much smaller and wouldn't take as long to close. However, she noticed the elder's breathing was getting significantly slower. This was to be expected because of the blood loss and poison, but was a very negative sign. Silence fell upon the cave for around a minute while Sakura closed Chiyo's chest wound. All that could be heard was the light humming of the medical jutsu. After completing her task, Sakura turned to face the Naruto and called out to him. "Naruto, help me move her." Naruto tensed again at the mention of his name, anger rushing over him. He hadn't wanted his old teammate to discover his identity until much later. Unfortunately, it had only taken the medic Nin a little over a month to find out who he was. "Don't you dare call me by my name," hissed the young Jinchuriki as his anger built by the second. Sakura flinched at Naruto's hostile response. She understood why he was furious with her. She thought back to what the masked swordsman had said to Sasuke and her at the ramen stand. "Personally, I can't think of a crueler act than betraying a comrade or teammate. I may have done gruesome things to those Kirin, but you impaled your teammate with a Chidori. So Sasuke Uchiha, I won't put you at the same level as me, in fact I'll put you at an even lower level than me. You are the lowest of the low, one who nearly killed his own teammate to obtain power." Sakura didn't know the extent of what happened at the Valley of the End between her two teammates. She had found it hard to believe the masked swordsman's words about Sasuke's actions until now. She didn't believe the man had any credibility in regards to what had transpired until discovering his identity just recently. Had Sasuke really gone that far? It made Naruto's anger that day in the hospital all the more reasonable if it was true. "Nothing changes now that you know who I am. My hatred towards you hasn't been some charade. I don't care what this elder or anyone else thinks about you, you're still scum to me, got that?" Chiyo was taken back by the injured swordsman's words. There was clearly bad history between the two, she just couldn't believe someone had such hateful attitude towards Sakura. She only had great things to say about the young medic. Tears began to form in Sakura's eyes. Her once cheerful and kind-hearted teammate had turned into a hateful and violent individual. The worst part was that she was partially to blame for the transformation. "Look. I clearly know how you feel about me, but you have to put those feelings aside for a short while and help me. We wouldn't have survived this fight without her and now her life is on the line." Naruto stood silently as he took in Sakura's words. He hated to admit it, but she had a point. The Tsunade elder had been crucial to their victory. He would help move her to where she could receive treatment, but that would be it. Naruto walked over to the kneeling Sakura and Chiyo who was still seated on the ground. He bent down to the ground and draped the elder's left arm around his right shoulder while Sakura took her other arm. Sakura sighed a breath of relief, glad that Chiyo would at least potentially have the chance to be treated. Sakura looked over her ex-teammate and noticed just how gruesome his arm injury was. She remembered him getting hit by Sasori's water earlier in the fight but hadn't really taken the time to look at the severity of it. "Your arm is..." Sakura was unable to finish her sentence as Naruto quickly cut her off. "Is none of your business. I don't need your help, so keep your mouth shut and let's move the old hag to wherever she needs to get to. I'm sure as hell not going through this process to get your help and talk with you." Sakura held back a response, knowing that she was lucky to have even gotten him to agree to help. She felt Naruto stand up and followed suit as they leapt out of the decimated cavern, leaving hundreds of destroyed puppets and a dead Akatsuki member lying motionlessly on the boulders and rubble where the battle had been waged. It was becoming harder and harder for Chiyo to breathe as the two Konoha shinobi carried her through the woods in an attempt to rendezvous with the rest of the team who had gone after Sasori's Akatsuki partner. She smirked as she thought about Sakura and the swordsman's very different motives for assisting her currently. Sakura was doing it out of kindness and friendship, as well as a will to never surrender. The swordsman on the other hand seemed to be doing it out of a sense of guilt or as a thanks for her assistance. The two truly represented polar opposites as people. Sakura gave hope to the dying elder about what the shinobi world could potentially look like. If powerful young shinobi like Sakura continued to be produced and shared a similar ideology to hers, there would be a real possibility for the emergence of a more peaceful world. The swordsman represented all the failings of the current shinobi system. Jinchuriki were some of the people who suffered most from the current system. They were constantly ostracized from society and trained to be a weapon. The second a tailed beast was sealed within them. She wasn't too surprised the young man carrying her was as hostile as he was, having seen what the Tsunade Jinchuriki Gaara was like in his younger days. The change the recently deceased Kazekage had gone through was remarkable. He had gone from being a mentally unstable boy feared by nearly all in the village to the leader of Suna who had gained the respect of nearly all he presided over. The more she thought about it, the more extraordinary it became to her. The group of three began to see a clearing ahead after traveling through the woods for around 15 minutes. As they darted out of the forest, Chiyo began to see dozens of familiar Suna shinobi and a few Konoha nin gathered around the motionless body of the Kazekage. The Suna shinobi created a path so that Chiyo could be carried near the Kazekage. Naruto recognized both of the Kazekage's siblings from way back during the Chunin exams. Both of them looked pretty much the same besides the fact that they'd both grown. Sakura pulled Chiyo from off Naruto's shoulder and set her on the ground. "How are you feeling, Lady Chiyo?" asked Sakura quietly as two Suna medics also circled around the elder. Sakura and the medics talked with Chiyo and continued to assess her condition, which was clearly deteriorating. Naruto stared straight ahead at the body of the deceased Kazekage, a fellow Jinchuriki that he had done battle with back in his genin days. He sadly smirked at how different things had gone for the two of them since their battle. Naruto had been the one who preached the need to develop bonds with others, to try and earn the respect of his comrades. Naruto had told Gaara that even Jinchuriki were capable of making friends and that strength came from the need to protect those you hold close. Naruto had told Gaara of his goal to become Hokage in order to gain the respect of all. The redhead had clearly taken that advice to heart. He had become the leader of his village, earning the respect of many of his comrades for his combat ability and strength. Dozens of elite Suna shinobi had come to try and save him despite knowing the slim probability for success. Gaara had forged bonds and members of his village who were now genuinely saddened by his death. Tears were rolling down some ninjas' faces as they looked on at their deceased leader who had sacrificed his life in order to protect them. Naruto barely had anyone now. He was a loner who had given up on changing the system despite his fervent belief in change during his younger days. The two had reversed roles as Gaara had managed to accomplish everything Naruto had dreamed about in his younger days. Kakashi approached the motionless Naruto and spoke up. "What happened with Sasori?" questioned the copy ninja. Naruto remained silent for a short amount of time before responding. "He's dead, body's still back at the cavern. Good job, our guy got away. He used the help of another Akatsuki member. We'll leave Sasori's body to Suna, he's their missing nin." Naruto didn't respond to Kakashi's words, causing the masked man to sigh at his student's lack of response. Kakashi looked down at significant wound on Naruto's arm. He knew the fox's ability would fix it up in due time, but it would still probably be wise to get his arm checked out by a medic. "You should go get that arm checked out," said Kakashi before walking over to Temari, who had tears forming in her eyes, in order to give her an update regarding Sasori. Chiyo knew she was going to die. Sakura was a skilled medic, but without an antidote and the amount of blood Chiyo had already lost, her chances of survival appeared to be slim to none. She could tell her condition was deteriorating rapidly. The Suna elder was shocked at how many of her fellow village nin had made the effort to come find their Kazekage. It truly showed how much Gaara's reputation had changed, and that the traditional shinobi system could change. The once feared one-tailed Jinchuriki had become a beloved Kazekage whose death had brought on the tears of many of his comrades. The new generation of shinobi were seeming to bring about positive change in the world. Konoha nin were risking their lives to help Suna shinobi, just a few years after the attack during the Chunin exams. She frowned at how little positive change she had brought about in the world as her life was coming to a close. However, she still had a chance to impact the world for the better and help this younger generation of shinobi alter the shinobi system. Sakura, bring me over to Gaara please. Sakura gained a confused look after hearing the elder's request. Please child. Sakura hesitated a few seconds before nodding her head in agreement and proceeded to carry the Tsunade elder up to the body of the Kazekage. Chiyo kneeled next to Gaara's body as a few looked on in confusion. The elder placed her hands on Gaara's chest as blue chakra began to be emitted from her hands. Murmurs about the action's futility began to arise amongst the watching shinobi. Naruto sighed and looked away, not wanting to watch the desperate and pointless actions of Chiyo. The death of his fellow Jinchuriki was definitely a downer for Naruto. He was one of the few who knew all too well of the struggles Naruto had to endure while growing up. There were only 7 others across the shinobi world that had that same knowledge. What was also concerning was the fact that the Akatsuki had actually managed to kill Gaara. Gaara was strong back in his genin days and must have become significantly stronger to become Kazekage. They had managed to take down the leader of a village and they'd soon be coming for him. He had to improve. Lady Chiyo, you can't be channeling that much chakra, you're already in bad condition. Yelled Sakura, causing Naruto to turn back around. What was this lady trying to do? Naruto looked around at the confused and sad appearances on Tsunade shinobi's faces. Temari, you've got to get her to stop. Temari had an emotionless appearance on, but Naruto could tell she was trying to hold back some tears. Sakura, this is Lady Chiyo's own life resurrection technique. It allows the user to bring a person to life by sacrificing their own life force. She's giving her own life for Gaara's. Sakura turned around in shock. This was the end of the Tsunade elder. Nuabari wielder. Please come here, muttered Chiyo through shortened breaths. Naruto stood in place for a few seconds before walking over. He didn't know what the dying lady could possibly want. He understood the gravity of what she was doing and he respected it. Hell, he kind of respected her, she was definitely a decent fighter. He definitely wouldn't have wanted to face her in her younger days and she helped him out a ton in the Sasori fight. However, this wasn't his scene. He didn't want to be at the center of attention currently. Naruto approached her silently before standing in front of the elder. He stood soundlessly until Chiyo spoke up. We both know you've got quite a bit of chakra. Mind channeling a bit, into me? Naruto hesitated, but walked behind the elder and began channeling a bit of chakra into her through his hands on her back. Is he actually helping someone else out? Questioned Sasuke to Kakashi, who just shrugged his shoulders. All that could be heard for about a minute was the hum of the reincarnation jutsu. Naruto could feel the elder's heavy breathing until abruptly, the jutsu stopped. Naruto wasn't sure if she was about to die, or if she had finished the jutsu. Things will get better, Nuabari wielder. If you can find just one person. Naruto's eyes rose in surprise under his mask as he heard Sakura sprint over. Lady Chiyo! Yelled Sakura as she rushed over to catch the elder who was collapsing to the ground. Sakura caught her in both her arms, a smile on Sakura's face. Thank you Sakura, for giving me hope for this world. Muttered Chiyo with her last breath before her heartbeat ceased. Tears poured down Sakura's as she held the dead body of the woman who she held in such high regard. Gaara's left shoulder twitched to life. The rest of his limbs began to move around slowly before his eyes shot open. He pushed himself up quickly and began to look around. He was surrounded by a plethora of Tsunade ninja and a few Konoha ones. He had no idea where he was. Last he remembered was being in excruciating pain. Tsunade ninja rushed to surround the awoken Kazekage and the body of the deceased Chiyo. Naruto was in the middle of it all as he began to tunnel out of the mass of people. Kakashi was on the outside of the mob and Naruto started walking towards him. I'm heading back. Stated Naruto before walking past his former sensei who didn't respond. The Nuabari wielder would have a lot on his mind during his journey back to Konoha. Naruto had made it back to Konoha this morning. He had set up camp the previous night in the land of rivers to catch some much-needed sleep. There was a nice quiet spot alongside a small stream where he had placed his sleeping bag and constructed a fire. He had found a sturdy log that he reclined against while staring into a dimly lit fire. He sat for nearly an hour thinking about two subjects. The first being the fact that Sakura now knew his identity. It was bound to happen eventually, but this was a little sooner than he envisioned. He hadn't had a very steady reintegration back into the Leaf. He'd been on 2 challenging missions. Challenging was a huge understatement when describing the most recent one. Interactions with others had also been quite stressful. He hadn't been able to seclude himself as much as he would have liked. Who Sakura would go on to tell was completely up in the air. He figured she'd definitely tell Sasuke, which would create a huge mess. The Uchiha finding out his identity would really hinder his goal of keeping as far away from the asshole as possible. The other topic that had troubled him was Chiyo's parting words, just find one person. He wasn't anywhere close to finding one person, and what benefit would it provide him anyway? He used to fight to protect those he cared about. He still cared about Jiraiya and Tsunade a good amount. He'd risk his life for them under most circumstances. However, protection wasn't his new motivation. He had a new goal to accomplish, and he wasn't going to stop his path until it was accomplished. Was there room for another person on his path? They'd probably just end up being a thoughts bounced through his head before dozing off for the night. After entering into the Konoha gates at around noon the next day, Naruto was promptly escorted to the Hokage's office. The 4 ANBU waiting for him at the entrance were about as hostile and antisocial as he was. He understood the urgency from Tsunade though. He was well aware of the gravity of the mission he and the other involved Konoha nin had completed. He was immediately screamed at by Tsunade for not getting his arm healed before traveling back to Konoha. Naruto argued that it was irrelevant as the fox would eventually heal it and that it wasn't a problem for him on his journey back home. Tsunade had sighed heavily at his argument but demanded that he head to the hospital and get his arm repaired after giving a mission report. Naruto liked riling up the Hokage but wasn't completely opposed to getting some medical treatment. He gave a pretty detailed recount of the mission but did leave out some parts regarding the actual Sasori. Particularly the part where he nearly killed Sakura and Chiyo. He figured he'd leave that for Sakura to tell. Tsunade became both concerned and intrigued as he told of the jutsu Itachi and Kisame had used. However, a large smile appeared on her face at the news of Sasori's defeat and the involvement Sakura and he had in the battle. That smile dimmed down upon learning of Chiyo's death, but her saving the Kazekage was a great benefit towards the Leaf. Gaara's survival and the Leaf's role in it basically assured a tight bond between the two nations going forward. Tsunade was also clearly concerned about Sakura discovering that the Nuabari wielder was actually Naruto. She said she'd be closely monitoring the situation going forward. Naruto exited the Hokage's office with thanks from Tsunade. He had proceeded immediately to the hospital to get that out of the way. The wound had healed a decent amount but it still looked pretty bad. The doctors were appalled that he had traveled a whole day with the injury. They healed the wound and put a sling on the arm. Naruto knew he'd probably take it off in a couple days but was happy he'd gotten the arm the medical attention as it understandably felt much better after treatment. By the time he had exited the hospital at around 6 p.m. the sun was starting to set, so Naruto began his walk to his apartment building and the poorer parts of Konoha. He still got the terrified and spiteful stares as he walked through the streets. However, this time he noticed much more people whispering to others about him. He supposed word of the most recent mission had begun to get around. He ignored it all and walked straight ahead as a path formed in front from people looking to stay out of his way. INO leaned against the table with one hand on her cheek, completely unentertained by the conversation Shino and Choji were having about their favorite types of food. Choji couldn't fathom how Shino enjoyed life on such a strict and bland diet despite the fact that Shino had stated that he needed to maintain a certain diet for his insects. Between that argument, Shikamaru's sleeping, Kiba's obnoxiousness and Hinata's shyness, it was clear this dinner was going nowhere. Of course the senseis for the two teams weren't there to see this disaster. Kurenai and Asuma stated that the two teams should spend more time together because their class of graduates often were mixed and matched together for missions. INO figured it was just an excuse for the two jonins to spend time together. It was pathetic how poorly the two tried to hide their relationship. The group of 6 were in a booth against an open window and INO turned to face outside. The sun was setting, causing a beautiful orange shade to replace the clear blue sky from the day. The street lights had turned on and people were beginning to file home for the night. As she stared outside she noticed civilians whispering and a path seeming to open up in the street. She became interested and sat up to get a better view of what was coming. She smirked as it turned out to be the newly homicidal masked swordsman Naruto Uzumaki with a sling on his arm. His appearance offered her too great of an opportunity to pass up. He provided her an excuse to escape from this god-awful dinner, as well as the entertaining chance to piss him off yet again. "Hey guys, I think I'm going to head out. I've got an early morning so I've got to get home as soon as possible," stated INO while shuffling past Shikamaru and Choji on her side of the booth. A curious look appeared on the young Nara's face. They'd been here for a little over an hour and he easily understood her desire to leave. However, her decision to leave was quite abrupt. He peered out the window and saw a masked Naruto walking through the streets. A smirk appeared on his face as all suddenly made sense. INO did always seem to be fascinated with psychos. Troublesome, INO rushed out of the restaurant as to not fall too far behind Naruto. She hadn't seen the guy for more than 2 weeks after their mission together that resulted in a heated battle with a trio of Cloud Shinobi. Rumors were spreading quickly around the village of Konoha ninja playing a massive role in saving the Kazekage and combating elite missing Nin. Their class had been informed that Team 7 and Team Guy were going on a mission to Suna. However, whispers were beginning to spread about a masked swordsman also playing a key role in the conflict. The sling on his arm would suggest he'd been on some difficult mission. After all, it was pretty hard to leave a severe injury on the young Jinchuriki. She was probably 15 yards behind Naruto as he walked through the village streets. She doubted he suspected anyone was following him, after all there were still a fair number of people out walking on the streets so she didn't really stick out. He kept walking straight ahead on the street path for around 10 minutes as INO maintained her distance behind him. He soon came upon the crossroad which led to either the poorer part of Konoha or the wealthy clan districts. This was where they had parted last time she saw him and that resulted in her not interacting with the guy for over 2 weeks. He began to take his path towards the poorer district before INO started running to catch up to him. "Hey!" shouted INO enthusiastically as she rushed the blonde swordsman. Naruto was preparing to leave the main street and head down the road towards his apartment until he heard someone rushing towards him from behind. He instinctually spun around, his good right hand cocked and ready to strike. As he turned his eyes fell upon long platinum blonde hair and the recognizable face of INO Yamanaka, causing him freeze the punch he was throwing. INO paused a couple feet in front of the now turned around Naruto, mouth agape with a shocked look on her face. "You were going to just punch someone saying hello?" shouted INO, causing the surrounding people to pause and look at them in confusion. Naruto looked around through his mask at the appalled expressions of the surrounding people. Attempting to punch the clan heir he had kidnapped to get back into the village wasn't going to help increase his already strikingly low public opinion rating within the village. His sweat dropped underneath his mask as he returned to his normal posture. "Sorry," said Naruto coldly. Most would have been turned off by the response and ended the conversation, but INO had started to figure out how break through the guy's cold outer shell. "Thanks for that kind-hearted apology, really means a lot. You're really becoming quite injury-prone these days, huh?" said a smirking INO with a sarcastic tone. Naruto let out a quiet growl at the Yamanaka's mocking comment. He didn't want to banter with her after such an exhausting series of days. "I really don't have time to deal with you right now, INO," muttered Naruto as he turned back towards where he was heading. INO saw that this conversation would actually soon come to an end so she rushed to continue it. Wait, I'm sorry. Geez, you're in an even fouler mood than usual. You know, rumors are starting to spread around the village about you." Naruto paused at her comment, curious as to what was being said about him. "There have been rumors going around about me since the second I got here, that's not too new." "True, but it is new when the rumors are somewhat positive. I mean, usually they revolve around you being a bloodthirsty psycho, so to hear something positive is quite the change of pace for you. Joked Ino as Naruto stood in place. Naruto ignored her teasing and turned to ask a question. What positive things could people possibly have to say about me? Rumor has it that you were just on a pretty important mission to Tsunade, any truth to that? Ino looked ahead as Naruto stood silently, no response. She crossed her arms under her chest and began tapping her foot due her old classmate's silence. If you won't tell me then I may have to just break into your mind asshole and find out for myself. Said Ino while glaring at Naruto before the boy spoke up. That would be an amazing plan, Ino. However, you're forgetting that there is absolutely no chance you could ever line up your jutsu and get into my head. What did you just say? Growled the platinum blonde whose anger was beginning to skyrocket. You heard exactly what I said. Is that a challenge? No, it's a fact. Stated Naruto in a rather blunt manner with a smirk under his mask. She was clearly furious. Ino was grinding her teeth and clenching both her fists while using all her willpower to restrain herself from clocking the guy right in the jaw. I'll ignore this for now, you dick, but only because you're such an amazing village hero now. Mocked the Yamanaka heir, attempting to try and get back at swordsman. Naruto tightened up at the sarcastic compliment. She clearly figured that the statement would make him uncomfortable and she was right. Well, thank you for that, means a lot. This has been such a great conversation, but I'm going to have go. Did have a pretty tiring mission and I need to eat. So you're really just not going to tell me about this mission? You can just ask your good friend Sakura, she'll be back in the next few days and she'll have nothing but great things to say about me. Not only did Sakura now know who he was, but she was also probably not very pleased by the fact he had nearly killed her in their fight against Sasori. Tsunade was undoubtedly going to be pissed about the tactic he took there. He figured Sakura would end up venting to the platinum blonde like she always would in their younger days. I don't get along with her too well anymore, so that's not really an option. Naruto was slightly intrigued by that. The two had been nearly inseparable in the academy until they began competing over the last Uchiha. Despite their competition, everyone knew they were still pretty close. I see, so you finally lost out to her with Sasuke? Kind of a shallow reason to stop talking to her, Ino. The Yamanaka heir honestly couldn't believe this guy. He had just no regard for maintaining a friendly relationship in the slightest. For some reason, his desire to stay away made her all the more interested in him. She needed to know more. The mystery surrounding him was too intriguing. If she played her cards right, she might even be able to get him to crack off that mask. She wanted to get another look at the face and piercing blue eyes behind it that had left her briefly speechless on their last mission. Well, if you don't mind having company while eating, I can tell you all about our falling out. Said Ino with a grin. She really didn't have many options besides being forward with Guy if she wanted to get to know more about him. He sure as hell wasn't going to extend an invitation for her spend any sort of time with him. What? Questioned Naruto. Was she really trying to spend more time with him after all the quips and insults he had sent her way throughout their short conversation? You heard exactly what I said. Said Ino in a mocking tone, using the same response Naruto had used earlier to make fun of her. Naruto remained silent, unsure of what to say or do. Oh, don't tell me you get nervous about spending time with a pretty girl like myself. Joked Ino as she walked closer to Naruto, causing him to nervously take a slight step backwards. Ino didn't stop until she was chest to chest with the blonde Jinchuriki. Naruto proceeded to stand his ground, not willing to let the platinum blonde make him look like a complete idiot. That's not it at all. Stated Naruto somewhat defensively. Ah, I see, so you're playing for the other team. Nothing wrong with that. Whispered Ino as she looked up into the eye slits of Naruto's mask. Oh, how she wished she could see his facial expression under that thing. Naruto knew he had to come up with a response. He was being made a fool of, in public no less. And, no, it's not that. I'm heading home to eat, and we both know a prima donna like yourself couldn't handle the rougher parts of Konoha. Ino stayed in close and chuckled at Naruto's rebuttal. She had the upper hand here and she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her anger at the comment he had just made. She leaned in closer, moving her head up to Naruto's ear before whispering so that no one else around them could hear. "I'm a big girl, Naruto. If you get to know me, I think you'll find I'm more than capable of handling myself." Naruto was at a loss for words. INO slowly leaned away while letting out a quiet chuckle. Both parties knew she'd won this verbal exchange. The two stood silently for a few seconds, INO refusing to break eye contact with the slits on Naruto's mask. "Well, if you got nothing left to say, why don't you start leading the way? You can make me something nice back at your place," said INO in a chipper manner. This girl was really continuing to be a problem for him. He had no idea how to deal with her. Nothing he said seemed to be able to turn her away. He let out a sigh in defeat and began walking past INO towards his street home before speaking up. "If you think I'm making you any of my food, you're even crazier than I previously thought." INO's sweat dropped at the comment. Wow, what a gentleman. That really means a lot coming from one of the most mentally unstable people in the village. INO followed behind Naruto as he walked past her. "Good thing for you, I really only asked to keep you company, food really isn't an issue. Besides, I just came from a restaurant, so why don't you lead the way?" Taunted INO as Naruto walked straight ahead with her following. He ignored the comment as he continued to walk with her behind him. She really was bothersome, but her persistence to find out more about him was somewhat entertaining. What was more troublesome was INO's knowledge of how uncomfortable he got with her in close proximity. She knew she was attractive and Naruto wasn't going to argue that she wasn't. She had a killer body that he figured any women would kill for, to go along with radiant long platinum blonde hair that was one of a kind. She had to be one of the most sought-after kunoichi in the entire village, and she was refusing to leave him alone. Who could blame him for getting flustered when she decided to get up close and personal? He was well aware that there was basically no chance she'd ever go for him, but flirting coming from her would affect anyone. As he walked with INO happily in tow, Chiyo's final words to him ran through his head. Just find one person. Was it worth it to make maybe just one connection? It wouldn't kill him to spend some time with someone else, probably. Chapter 19. INO eagerly watched as Naruto pulled out a key from his pocket and placed it into the hole situated slightly above the rusting bronze doorknob. The obvious reason for her eagerness was the prospect of actually being able to see where Naruto lived. She'd spent weeks now hypothesizing what had brought about such a drastic change in personality within her old classmate. She realized that over 3 years of life would easily change a person. However, some sort of event must have driven such a severe personality and character shift. She was positive that seeing his apartment and its contents would provide her with some answers regarding where he'd been, as well as what had happened to him. The other reason for her eagerness, one that she would never publicly admit, was that she really didn't want to see more of the district Naruto's apartment was located in. Konoha had begun to return to prosperity in recent years following the Oto/Suna invasion that had taken place during her Chunin exams. The village had obviously taken a financial hit, but it had managed to quickly recover and return to prominence as one of the leading economic powers. Despite the publicity regarding the growth of the economy and trade, tales about the poorer districts struggling were occasionally heard. INO rarely visited these parts of the village. After all, her clan district was basically in the opposite direction. Walking through it once again was a strong reminder that not everyone in Konoha was thriving. Run-down or destroyed buildings that had never been repaired following the invasion lined the trash-littered gravel streets. Sketchy-looking individuals could be seen in alleys leaning up against walls, their appearances only becoming more ominous as the sun continued setting. As a shinobi, she didn't feel overly threatened by anyone she saw, but she couldn't help but think this wasn't the safest place to be for a civilian woman her age. She couldn't believe that Naruto, especially in his younger days, lived in this area. The platinum blonde waited as Naruto pushed open the aged and cracked wooden door, which generated a loud squeaking noise. She followed him into the dimly lit apartment, and her first observation was that it certainly wasn't very big. It had a sort of living room and kitchen crammed all into one area. Naruto had decided to elegantly decorate the living room with a green couch and a small wooden coffee table, which was completely covered with scrolls. That was it. A refrigerator, sink and cupboards lined the wall directly in front of the entrance. A circular wooden table with 2 chairs were the only other objects in the kitchen portion of the room. There was another door immediately to the left of the entrance, which she assumed led to his bedroom. "Well, you certainly went all out in decorating this place, huh?" joked Ino in a sarcastic tone. She certainly wasn't going to be able to learn much about the masked swordsman based off of the room decor. "More than welcome to leave," muttered Naruto, seemingly not giving a care in the world regarding what her opinion of his place was. Ino smirked at the hostile response, clearly having anticipated something of the sort. She watched as he walked up to one of his cupboards and pulled out an instant ramen. As he prepared his extremely simple meal, Ino wandered over to the green couch located in the makeshift living room and took a seat. She immediately leaned over towards the coffee table to look at the scrolls that covered it and that even littered parts of the floor. "Don't even think about it, Ino," groaned Naruto, not wanting her to start reading the scrolls he had found in the Kiri cave he inhabited for years. "Oh come on, if you're not going to talk to me you have to at least give me something to read." "Actually I don't have to give you anything, you're the one who insisted on coming here." Ino sighed as silence fell over the room. Maybe this wasn't the best idea. Her intrigue hadn't waned at all, however, pestering the reclusive Naruto after what must have been a highly stressful mission likely wouldn't provide her an ideal situation to get information out of him. She inwardly berated herself for not fully thinking through the circumstances earlier. On the other hand, this could potentially be her last opportunity to actually be in Naruto's apartment. She had had to instigate conversation every time the two had talked since he returned. She couldn't just fold now and give up without even trying. She looked up at Naruto, who was now seated at the wooden table in the kitchen portion of the room. "Are you going to take off your mask to eat like a normal person, or are you going to continue practicing your psychotic tendencies even with company around?" asked Ino with a hint of playfulness in her voice, knowing that the question would likely draw a fiery response from the blonde across from her. Naruto gritted his teeth underneath his mask. Even in his own apartment as a guest, Ino wouldn't stop messing with him. He would typically just slightly tilt up his mask to eat food in order to maintain his practice of keeping the mask on constantly. Tonight wasn't going to be any different, regardless of the fact that the Yamanaka heiress was sitting across from him. "No, I am not going to take it off, Ino, and if anyone has been a psycho today it's you. You've basically forced your way into my apartment like some type of stalker." "What can I say, Naruto, you've piqued my interest. I tend to give a significant amount of attention towards things that intrigue me," stated Ino with a devious smirk as she sauntered over to the kitchen table and proceeded to take a seat across from the Jinchuriki. The emphasis she placed on significant made Naruto subtly gulp. Was this what flittering was? He'd never really had a girl show any significant amount of attention towards him from what he could remember. Granted, he probably wasn't the best at noticing that stuff before he left the village, and his time away in isolation certainly hadn't provided him with any opportunities to improve. Well, I guess that's really unfortunate for me. That depends how you look at it. Yes, I may harass you at times, but I'd bet that there's a large number of guys in the village that would love to have caught my attention. Don't you enjoy having a pretty girl like me around, Naruto?" Naruto hated the slight grin that covered the blonde Kunoichi's face. It really sucked that she knew she was attractive. It also sucked that she knew he wasn't comfortable in situations like this. He needed to come up with some sort of rebuttal so that he didn't completely lose the exchange. "What if I don't think you're pretty?" stated Naruto in as monotone a voice that he could muster. Ino's sweat dropped at the comment but quickly regained her composure as she stood up slightly and leaned over the table. "Oh, stop it, or else I'm really going to start thinking you're just not interested in women at all. Did your time away just destroy any sexual drive you had towards pretty girls?" Naruto couldn't be more thankful he had a mask on. He could feel his face starting to heat as Ino leaned over the table towards him, bringing her face and chest into notably closer proximity. Ino made sure to hold her position for quite a few seconds, trying her best to make sure Naruto was as uncomfortable as possible. After around 15 seconds she broke into loud laughter at what she assumed was Naruto's embarrassment and leaned back into her seat. Naruto let out a loud sigh before slightly hanging his head in defeat, knowing he wasn't going to be able to claim any sort of victory from this exchange. He could definitely leave INO, or just about anybody, speechless with his actions and behavior on the battlefield. However, he was quickly learning that verbal exchanges with the platinum blonde were another story. She had the upper hand on him and wasn't intimidated by his persona in the slightest, despite the fact that he'd actually abducted her not too long ago. "I'm glad you've had your fun, mask's definitely not coming off now," grunted Naruto as he slightly tilted up his mask, leaving only his lower jaw and mouth visible. INO pouted and crossed his arms, unhappy about his final decision but clearly still amused about the recent exchange. A brief silence fell over the room that was only occasionally interrupted by the slurping of ramen noodles. Naruto was initially content with just eating in silence, but couldn't keep one thought from running through his head. What Chiyo had said to him before her death continued to eat away at him. Would allowing somebody in a tad bit improve his situation? Hell, did his situation even need improvement? Did Chiyo see something he didn't? He peered up from his food to see INO idly looking around the barren apartment. "You told me you'd talk about what happened with Sakura," stated the Jinchuriki as he returned his gaze to his ramen in order to resume eating. INO's eyes shot open while locking back onto the masked blonde across from her. She was nearing the point of departure just a few seconds prior based off of how the visit was going. The fact that he instigated any sort of conversation came as a complete surprise when considering how things had been going. "Oh, yeah, of course. Well, I guess I shouldn't necessarily sound excited when talking about losing a friend, huh?" asked INO in a somewhat rhetorical manner. "Sound as excited as you want, I despise her so it doesn't make a difference to me," muttered Naruto through slightly gritted teeth. INO cringed a bit at the harsh response to her statement, knowing that the relationship with Sakura was a sour point for him. She remembered back to the day in the hospital where he tore the pink-haired Kunoichi apart. Clearly he held a significant amount of animosity towards the girl for one reason or another. She could easily think of a few potential reasons why. "Right, well, Sakura and I have had a complicated history that I'm sure you know a little about. Well, I remember the two of you desperately fighting over who would get the honor of touching Sasuke's dick first in the academy," responded Naruto, causing the Yamanaka's mouth to drop at the bluntness. INO began to yell a response but was quickly cut off by Naruto. "Hey! It was pathetic." INO gritted her teeth as her right hand tightened into a fist. He wasn't wrong, but the wording was a little too candid for her liking. Her anger began to dissipate quickly as she looked at Naruto across the table. She assumed that he forgot his mask was slightly tilted up, because she could see a grin beginning to spread across the uncovered portion of his face. Naruto was happy to have finally gained some sort of reaction from INO. He had been just getting battered around by her but he'd finally secured some sort of victory. That was until he saw the girl begin to chuckle. "What? You've just got a really nice smile," said INO with a smirk. She could have swore that she saw a slight hint of color appear on the man's face before he rapidly pulled his mask all the way back down. Of course she was slightly peeved that he had once again eliminated the opportunity to show any sort of facial expression, but she was happy she at least saw him smile for just a brief moment. There was just something that felt right about him having a happy expression on his face. Naruto had completely forgotten that his mask was tilted upwards. He cursed himself for being too focused on his food and proceeded to push the bowl to the side. He was somewhat interested to hear about how the relationship and eager to avoid any further discussion of removing the mask. "Get back to your story." INO knew this was an obvious deflection but went along with it regardless. She felt she'd riled him up enough at this point. Now was the time to get slightly more serious and potentially find out something new about him, depending on where the conversation went. Alright, learn to just take a compliment. Back to what I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted. We were really close friends before the academy. We really had a falling out once the academy began, as you so eloquently described. Naruto couldn't help but let out a slight chuckle at Ino's multiple instances of severe sarcasm, causing the Yamanaka heir to smile a bit. Things did get slightly better following our Chunin exams, but the tension over Sasuke was still there a bit. I eventually started to move on from him, probably a few months after you left actually. Him intentionally trying to leave nearly killed Shikamaru and Choji. It changed my entire perception of him. I guess I started to really just grow up and realize there's more to people than looks. Naruto closely watched Ino's demeanor as she recounted Sasuke's actions. She could see a twinge of pain in her face as she talked about her two teammates' near-death experience on the retrieval mission. I mean, you remember the state you all were in after that mission. You were arguably the worst out of everyone. But that's not the point. Ino continued on, clearly trying to change the subject as Naruto briefly zoned out. If only she knew the full extent of the injuries he had suffered. Naruto's life had been saved countless times thanks to his healing factor that came from the fox. However, severe injuries sometimes did leave a degree of scarring, as demonstrated by the darker shaded skin shaped in a jagged circle on the right side of his chest. The amount of time Sakura spent with Sasuke, even after he tried to leave, began to irk me. What really pissed off myself and our graduating class was how nonchalant she was when you left. I know this may be somewhat hard to hear, but at first, it didn't really seem to bother her. To be honest, I think she thought you'd return the village in relatively short order. Naruto briefly clenched his right fist under the table as Ino uncomfortably recounted Sakura's reaction to his departure. Ino had paused her monologue briefly in order to give Naruto some time to process what she said. He definitely wasn't surprised to hear how Sakura handled his departure, but it still angered him to no end. But I think it started to change right around the 1-year anniversary of your departure. No one on any of the teams in our class really wanted to associate with Sasuke or her. Team 8, 9 and 10 all had members on the rescue mission and all did hold a grudge towards Sasuke. Sakura was the only one who'd associate with him. She tried to reach to my team and I on a few occasions in order to connect with Sasuke again, but that was out of the question for Shikamaru and Choji, so I sided with them. Naruto smirked at the notion of his two ex-teammates being ostracized to an extent. Sasuke knew what it was like to be alone, he was certain it wouldn't bother the Uchiha very much. Sakura was another story, the cold shoulders she received must have been a change of pace for her. I think the Sasuke and her started to feel a little guiltier. I can't say for sure, but I'd guess so based on her change in rhetoric and demeanor whenever you leaving was brought up. Especially since no one had heard the smallest detail about your whereabouts. Honestly. Everyone thought you died. An awkward silence fell over the room as Ino's gaze fell to the floor. She'd maintained confidence throughout her story, not being afraid to tell it how it was. Most would argue that blunt honesty might not be the way to go given Nuu's apparent mental instability. However, she'd seen more of him than most and believed he was somewhat stable for the most part. Granted, his entire attitude and persona changed in combat, as if he was a completely different person, but all of her conversations one-on-one with him demonstrated he was quite sane. He was sarcastic and blunt in their conversations, so she figured beating around the bush wasn't the way to go with him. By the time the year anniversary of you leaving came around, I just lost interest in wanting to hang out with her. I was busy training, she was busy training. I was hanging out with my team, she was hanging out with, well, mostly Sasuke I guess. Ino gave a slight chuckle at the remark, which amused Naruto. We were cordial for the most part, but I kind of just moved on from her as a friend and definitely from Sasuke as a crush. The only occasions that I spent extensive time with them was during the occasional mission, such as the one you so kindly kidnapped me during. Correction, I think you meant to say saved you during. Cut in Naruto, gaining a chuckle and an eye roll from the Yamanaka. I guess that's one way to look at it, Naruto, but this is my story so I'll stick to how I viewed it. That's pretty much it though, not overly eventful, just kind of a steady falling out. Stated Ino as she placed her elbow on the table and rested her chin on her hand. Naruto leaned back in his chair, wondering how best to respond. She was honest with him, revealing personal information to someone she hadn't seen in over 3 years and hadn't known much prior to that gap. Any thoughts, maybe some sort of commentary? Quipped INO, hoping that she could get some sort of dialogue going between the two. Multiple thoughts and scenarios ran through Naruto's head regarding a potential response. INO sighed and sat backwards into her chair, disappointed about the result of her recap. She thought maybe she'd get something out of Naruto, but she supposed it was slightly naive to think so. I almost killed Sakura during the mission I was on. Okay. Like you were getting frustrated with her and considered. INO was abruptly cut off with a clarifying remark by Naruto. No, as in I intentionally blew up a cavern with her in it, which nearly crushed her with rubble. INO leaned back in her chair, at a slight loss of words. She was hoping for some response from Naruto, but wasn't necessarily excited to hear that he was out in the field trying to kill Konoha shinobi. Sure, she wasn't on good terms with Sakura, but that didn't mean she wanted the girl dead. Why would you do that? You can't do that, Naruto. Yelled INO, hoping to emphasize her displeasure with the revelation. Naruto sighed as he looked straight at the Yamanaka air through the eye slits in his mask. Why the hell did he decide to respond to her with a statement about nearly killing one of her old friends? It's not like he weighed the pros and cons of the statement, it was just kind of the first thing that came to mind about Sakura that he hadn't yet reveled. The incident was fresh in his mind and just spilled out. Yeah, may not have been the best course of action. Muttered Naruto, causing INO's mouth to slightly drop at the nonchalant response to such a drastic action. Not the best course of action. You think? I'm not a huge Sakura supporter these days either, but I wouldn't actively try and kill her on a mission. If anyone found out you killed her, you'd probably be arrested. Yelled INO once more, attempting to illustrate the severity of his actions. Naruto became slightly agitated at the response, particularly her comparison of feelings toward Sakura. Let's not pretend your outlook on Sakura is the same as mine, INO. Maybe I would have been reprimanded if I killed her. Hell, I'm probably going to be reprimanded regardless once she runs back crying to Tsunade. However, in the moment I saw an opportunity to kill an S-ranked criminal, and if Sakura was collateral then so be it. She would have done the same probably. The Yamanaka heiress had forgotten how cold the new Naruto was. It wasn't insanity, it was a calculated decision he made that nearly killed Sakura. The callousness of the strategy was just somewhat eye-opening to her. She was taken back at the statement, but made sure to compartmentalize the important information that Naruto relayed. Both Sakura and him had been involved in a fight with an S-ranked criminal. That was an astounding development, one she would potentially get back to after she illustrated how messed up his actions were. It's not even being reprimanded, they could execute you. That doesn't concern you at all. Rebutted INO, which to her surprise resulted in Naruto briefly laughing while shaking his head disappointingly. INO's facial expression changed to one of confusion as Naruto pulled his right arm back through the hole for his appendage on his sleeveless black shirt. He proceeded to lift up his shirt, partially revealing the toned and slightly skinny frame the Jinchuriki had. INO looked away slightly, not wanting to appear as if she was eyeing over the man in front of her. Of course she was already familiar with his physique after treating his injuries following the battle against a few Kyumo shinobi not long ago. She refocused her gaze onto the Kiri Hunter Nin mask while Naruto slowly pointed his left hand that was only slightly visible outside his sling towards the giant scar she had previously seen on the right side of his chest. You really think I'll be executed for blowing up a cavern that could have maybe killed Sakura? One of my ex-teammates shoved his entire fist through my chest and he's currently considered a valuable Konoha shinobi. How do you explain that, INO? How? Yelled Naruto, leaving INO completely speechless as he pulled his shirt back down. She had been curious what that scar was since the last time she healed him. A Chidori through the chest would certainly explain it. None of the Konoha 12 knew the details of Naruto and Sasuke's fight. The only information they heard was that Sasuke had narrowly won, only to be knocked out by Kakashi a few minutes afterwards and returned to the village. The location of the Chidori strike would have killed 99% of shinobi in the world. She assumed his Jinchuriki healing ability was the only reason he survived. I don't know. I didn't know he. INO trailed off while being at a loss for words. For Naruto, it honestly felt good to let out some pent-up emotion. He had wanted to vent about the lack of repercussions for Sasuke, the apparent absolute forgiveness he received. Granted, he had been away over 3 years, but it blew his mind that the Uchiha survivor had seemingly gotten away with endangering the lives of multiple Konoha shinobi and attempting to abandon He village. Well, now you know. Sasuke Uchiha shoved a Chidori through his teammate's chest in an active attempt to kill him. You'd think that Sakura would show a little appreciation for laying my life on the line while she sat at home, merely hoping that the boy she's been infatuated with returns, right? Nope, not a care in the world for anyone else involved, as long as she gets what she wants. Both of them are worthless scum. Ranted Naruto as INO just looked down at the table. She didn't know what to say, or what Naruto needed right now, but she could feel the anger radiating off of his fully tensed body. The blonde Jinchuriki halted his tirade, letting out a few deep breaths in order to calm down. He didn't think he'd scarred the girl. If his past actions that she'd witnessed hadn't done that, an emotional rant wouldn't do it. It was clear though that she didn't know how to suitably respond after what he'd said. That kinda just all spilled out. Sorry for yelling all of that at you. You didn't have anything to do with it. No, not at all. I really don't mind. Like I mentioned, none of us had any idea your fight with Sasuke went that far. Pretty happy you decided to share it with me, said INO while sadly smiling. Naruto was glad she was understanding, but was getting somewhat uncomfortable with the idea of sharing any other sentiments. INO had heard enough, and he still believed that getting close with individuals was potentially dangerous despite what Chio said to him. He had done more than enough conversing and sharing for today. It was time to start wrapping this up. Yeah, well, no one else in the village is insane enough to talk with me, let alone force their way into my apartment. Figured I'd reward you for being as mentally unstable as me by telling you something personal. INO briefly glared at Naruto for his insult, but clearly noticed his attempt to steer the conversation away from his personal life and emotions. She considered trying to dig for more details, but realized she got way more out of the Uzumaki than she had thought she would. I'm really glad you followed up your reward by insulting me, Naruto, such a gentleman. You've proven once again that chivalry isn't dead. Sarcastically groaned the Yamanaka. Your backhanded compliments mean so much to me. Thank you for that, INO. Unfortunately, it is getting late and I'm exhausted, so I may have to kick you out before you praise me even further. INO could feel that the conversation would be coming to a close, so she wasn't surprised that Naruto would ask her to leave. The sun had set and it was getting late. She was sure there was plenty of validity to the idea that he was tired after a mission that he revealed involved fighting an S-ranked criminal. However, her intrigue in the Uzumaki had only increased after tonight, and she was eager to lock in another opportunity to interact with the blonde. Ideally it would be sooner rather than later. Fine, I'll let you force me out, Naruto. Just going to mention that you're one of maybe 2% of the single population of Konoha that would be kicking me out of their apartment this late at night. You sure you don't want me to maybe entertain you a little bit more tonight? Quipped INO as she stood up from her and walked over to Naruto, the same devious smirk from early in the night sitting on her face. It was Naruto's turn to be left speechless at INO's apparent suggestion as she proceeded to place her hand on his right shoulder. He slightly tilted his head to look up at her, her light blue eyes mischievously peering at him. Well, you not responding isn't necessarily a no, so I guess that means you're still somewhat into women. Good to know, Naruto, very good to know. Naruto slightly gulped while INO removed her hand from his shoulder. I'll get out of your hair though, I know you actually are exhausted. You mentioned fighting an S-ranked criminal, so that definitely adds up. I'll need to be hearing more about that next time. Next time? Questioned Naruto, unsure of whether or not he was ready to commit to another one of these get-togethers. He really wasn't sure what it was, probably more of an information-gathering session for INO that had the added bonus of getting to mess with him. He also inwardly cursed that he had unintentionally revealed that he fought an S-ranked criminal on his past mission. She really was good at getting him to reveal things he wasn't trying to. He knew he hadn't revealed that Sakura knew his identity now, but he wasn't ready to discuss that matter yet. He needed to think through the potential effects and consequences of her knowing for himself first. Oh yes, next time. Actually, here's an idea. We're going to spar, and the loser has to buy the other dinner. Your arm's clearly pretty messed up, so let's do it, maybe next week. Perfect, now I know where you live, so I'll be harassing you late next week about it. Thanks for having me, and I'll see you soon. Yelled INO as she hustled towards the door and exited before Naruto even had the opportunity to offer any sort of refusal. The Yamanaka had essentially had an entire scheduling conversation with herself in the span of a minute. He hung his head in defeat as he figured there was little chance he'd be getting out of this with her. For some reason though, he found himself not overly concerned with it. He supposed there were significantly worse things to do than spar with the gorgeous heir to the Yamanaka clan. He also had much more pressing matters to consider. Such as whether or not Sakura would tell Tsunade how he almost killed her. He figured she would. The greater concern he faced was who Sakura was going to reveal his identity to now that she knew who he was. These were the primary thoughts plaguing his mind as he shut off the lights to his apartment and attempted to drift off to sleep. Team 10 and Team 7 had stuck around Suna for 3 days to ensure that Gaara's return to power went smoothly. He received a hero's welcome after entering the village for the first time since his capture, and deservingly so. Sakura had heard about the lengths he went to in order to protect the large majority of the Suna populace from another Akatsuki member. This one was named Deidara, an ex-IWA shinobi who specialized in using explosive clay. Kakashi and Sasuke had engaged the man while she was involved in her fight against Sasori. They ran into no problems at all while in Suna and utilized the time in the village to rest up before traveling back to Konoha. The entire village was extremely appreciative of their efforts, and the prospect of an alliance forming between the two nations seemed like a surefire thing. Sakura had yet to tell anyone about the details involved in her fight against Sasori. She typically would have told Sasuke and Kakashi any detail she deemed significant following a mission. Part of a shinobi's job was to relay information back to superiors so they could make informed decisions for the village going forward. However, Sakura had managed to put this off using a bevy of excuses, largely revolving around exhaustion and traumatization. Sasuke didn't seem to care to that large an extent. He was clearly more preoccupied with his most recent engagement with his brother Itachi. Kakashi on the other hand was clearly suspicious of her, and she knew she'd have to recount the mission details to Tsunade. She wasn't even sure who knew that the masked swordsman was Naruto, or if anyone knew at all. Sakura had a million thoughts running through her head. Hell, she had an additional million questions running through her head on top of that. Despite being ordered to use the time in Suna to rest, she had gotten next to no sleep as she thought about this new Naruto and what she should do with the knowledge of his identity. As the days passed, one thing began to become clear to her. She needed to tell Sasuke. Not only did he deserve to know, but if it came out that she knew of Naruto's identity before him and didn't let him know, all the progress she had made in her relationship with the last Uchiha would be destroyed. So on the 4th day Kakashi, Sasuke, and Sakura prepared to depart from Suna. Kakashi was running a little late as he had to finalize a few political details at the Kazekage's office. That left Sasuke and Sakura near the exit to the village alone with nobody else in close proximity. Sakura didn't fully know how best break what she had to say to Sasuke, so she figured she should just come straight out with it. Sasuke, I need to tell you something.